Cassandra, just a quick question to the audience. I'd just like to see a show of hands how many here have children that they don't regard as adults yet.
Well,
okay, so there's quite
I've got grandchildren I don't regard as adults.
Very good.
Yes,
I might open for questions in a minute. I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotes just that came to mind after I listened to Cassandra. My daughter, she's nearly 8, and just to paint a picture of my daughter, she likes to climb trees, and we're privileged to have a big yard with some trees. And she will grab her pink handbag, she will shove her Barbie doll in there, she'll whack her pirate eye cap on, and she'll climb up the tree, and her feet will be somewhere up here where the lights are. And at that point I usually gasp and look away. But I've always felt very strongly that she needs to make decisions and she needs to figure these things out for herself. Consequences happened. Recently she broke her arm, which gave me a little bit of pause, but the way she handled that whole experience kind of said to me that actually something's going right here. And another quick anecdote, my son is nearly 13. He went away on a hike recently for 3 days. They caught the train to Woy Woy with packs on their back, went hiking out in the wilderness for 3 days. Part of the scouting movement, which is a civil society organisation that I highly commend to anyone that's got parents. It's all about teaching people self-reliance and have children. And so I asked him, I said, who's leading this and how old are they? And he said, oh, it's this girl Lucy, she's 14. And I said, okay, fair enough. But off they went for 3 days and they were fine. And it was, kids can still do those sorts of things today, but I agree. It's actually the institutional or the social environment we're in, cultural environment has made it harder, but parents should still, I think, be making opportunities for the kids. I'll throw open to questions, and I'll allow the panel to ask each other questions if they wish as well. So, Peter?
All these things like pool fences and trampolines and all this sort of stuff, does this come out of the courts who've made big payments to people in certain situations?
So I always try to say there's 2 exceptions to the don't worry about anything, it's all garbage rule. One is seat belts and the other is pool fences. Pool fences are fantastic. I'll give you an example of how silly most of the rest of it is. When you look at the children's safety advice about backyards, they'll tell you how many kids every year die in backyards. What they don't tell you is that once you control for swimming pools, the number's basically 0.
Yeah, but the question was about to what extent does this come back to the court?
So it's actually, I think having paid attention to this for a while now, there is it would be nice if there were a couple of culprits whose actions could be addressed and misinformation could be corrected. But there is a conspiracy of goodwill. There are far too many people who really think that they're doing the right thing, and I get quite upset people telling me that it's so irresponsible that you would tell people to be less safe. And I think it is the road that is paved with good intentions is the problem here, and that's why addressing it requires us to. You can't just solve one problem. There are parent groups, there are professional academics who study safety. You're all familiar with the growth in preventative health and safety, and then there's the Australian standards process, which keeps creeping the safety standards for everything up and up and up. Then there's the politicians who go looking for things like junk food in canteens because they need an issue to run on. So it's everywhere. And I think a lot of people are sincere in their level of care, and that's what makes it really hard. Is sometimes you can see people just being cravingly self-serving about a particular product or interest or project they've got. When it comes to kids' safety, there's so much genuinely sincere concern. It's really misplaced, but that's why I think you have to attack it with some compassion for where it's coming from, not just make fun of it, although making fun of it's quite fun.
I've had something like 8 children in my life, of which 4 have been biologically mine. And my comment would be it's horses for courses. I mean, every child is different, and what suits one doesn't suit the other. And there needs to be some kind of internal politics in the family where the trade-offs are made. But my real question is about the role of the state where the parents themselves are defective in some obvious manner. and the role of the state, in fact, in breaking families up or encouraging families to break up. Because my observation in schools is that there's a large number of children there that come from single parent families or families where they don't know who their parents fully are, and so on. Does the state have any role in all of this?
You want to have a crack?
This is really tricky because it's, you see these horrible cases where children are being, systematically abused, and I mean the regulation.
I mean minor abuse. So
Oh,
I'm not talking
minor.
about major abuse.
This is
They're
subjective.
neglected in some manner. They're not fed properly.
Well, I mean,
They're not vaccinated. Say,
but this, I mean, that's all subjective. Like what one parent's, I think some people would look at my parenting and say, she's brazenly negligent. I sent my 7-year-old to get the milk the other day from down the road, and that would be, brazenly negligent. So, I mean, this is such a subjective question. It's a really hard thing. I mean, you can't, you want to protect minors from bad parenting, but any regulation you put in place is sort of a bit redundant, because if you're going to be a bad parent, you don't care about, most of the case, you're not going to care about the law regardless. It's...
Is the milk still in the cow, or is it...
hand milked.
Yeah.
With the cream.
It is very tricky though. It's
Yeah, I'll answer that as well. I'm a Libertarian, so I don't think there's any role for the state. But I see that a group only has rights that individuals within the group already had and could assign to the group. So the question to me is, if a child's being abused, do I have a right to go and rescue the child? And I would say, if a child's being aggressed against, if it's being abused in a serious sense, then the child, as a self-owner, has a right to leave that household. But as a very young child that can't exercise that right, then the rest of us do have some sort of right, although it can't be clearly defined at a particular age or a particular instance. It's a grey area that maybe courts have to decide in specific cases. But even before the court decided, if I saw a child being sexually assaulted, say, I would go and take that step and I'd rescue that child. And I'd take that child into my own house, and I'd let someone take me to court later on if they wanted to. And then I would argue that I was doing the right thing. But I would say, you have to decide, are you willing to go and rescue that child yourself? And if you see one child over here being sexually assaulted, and another child over there being fed raw milk, so which one are you going to go and rescue? Because you can't go and rescue everybody. You can't say everybody has a right to the best parents in the world. Right? Because those best parents in the world would be very busy, wouldn't they? So we all have to put up with not quite the best parents, We have to put up with ordinary human being parents, but yet we have to rescue those who are being most seriously abused. So that's where we should concentrate.
Fido? Sorry.
So just to sort of expand on that point, vaccinations, is it responsible parenting or an Illuminati conspiracy?
Those are the only options.
Go make your own.
Yes?
At the risk of revisiting a very long, crazy thread some while back, I'm in the camp that says kids are people with rights, self-owners, as you say. And I think that the vaccination argument has been framed in terms of parents' rights, which is a nonsense, and that kids need to be vaccinated. There are simple things that are essential to their well-being, then the child citizen has a right to those things being done for them while they're little.
Any different views?
I'd just say that vaccination is not an all or nothing choice. If I was taking my children to a very poor village in India, I would probably opt for a few more vaccines than I would living in Sydney. That there's not just a certain bucket of these 28 things must be taken, and only 27 out of the 28 of them would be child abuse. It is a bit silly, you make a cost-benefit decision, and you make a marginal decision, like you do with everything. You know?
I vaccinated all my kids late. The first one, hepatitis B, you're in the hospital. I don't want to get into the discussion, but there's a lot of first world countries like Japan where they don't vaccinate till 2. There's a lot of different literature on when is the correct rate to vaccinate, what to do it against. And I mean, obviously when we went into the developing countries, all the vaccinations are up to date. But I mean, when I had my newborn in my arm, the first one I gave the hepatitis B vaccine too, no problems. Even though this is a bloodborne, disease, and really, my sister who worked in drug and alcohol said we used to give this to all the mums who were prostitutes who were delivering babies because we were a bit worried, frankly, that this was going to be an issue. So when it came to that vaccine, I said I think hepatitis B is everyone should be entitled to the hepatitis B vaccine. Giving it to my newborn baby, and the first one had a fever overnight, it was a bit traumatic. Well, there isn't much of a point. So it's something. Once again, you can't take an axe to it. It needs a bit of, as Mark said, a bit of finesse.
Trish?
Yeah, so when I grew up, I had this nice suburban house in Melbourne. I used to run around with my friends and stuff. But then when we moved to Sydney, we moved into an apartment building. And then part of that was because I didn't know any of the other kids around. My parents didn't know their parents. In terms of the environment, was a lot less hospitable. I would think that while, Cass, you live in an apartment, yet your kids are quite active. I'm just wondering how we kind of reconcile this general move amongst, a lot of people wanting to live in, higher density living, particularly in the inner city, with also trying to give your kids some freedom.
It's a massive problem, but our last house before, we live in a flat around the corner,